What is the persistent objector rule in customary IHL? Imagine a world where countries can pick and choose which rules of where they follow. That's where the persistent objector rule comes into play. It's a principle in international law that helps decide if a country must follow new rules about war and peace. This rule says that if a country strongly and clearly objects to a new rule as it's being formed, it can avoid being bound by that rule. But it has to be consistent and loud about its opposition from the very start. If a country objects early and keeps saying no, it doesn't have to follow that rule later. Customary international law develops over time through what countries do and what they believe is legally right. This is called state practice and opinio juris. The persistent objector rule respects a country's sovereignty by allowing it to opt out if it has been clear and persistent in its opposition. For the rule to work, a few conditions must be met. First, the country must make its objection clear and easy to understand. Second, it must tell other countries about its opposition. Third, it has to keep that opposition going from the beginning and throughout the process. Lastly, it should raise its objection as early as possible, ideally when the rule is just starting to take shape. This rule is not accepted everywhere. Some argue it conflicts with the idea that certain rules are universal and cannot be broken. Still, it has been recognized in discussions about international law, including by the International Law Commission. In the context of international humanitarian law, which includes the Geneva Conventions and rules about armed conflict, the persistent objector rule could let a country reject some emerging norms. But many core rules are considered jus cogens, rules from which no one can deviate. These fundamental norms about protecting civilians and limiting warfare are seen as universal, so the rule doesn't usually apply to them. In practice, the persistent objector rule is rarely used in international humanitarian law. That's because most countries agree on the basic principles of protecting civilians and following the laws of war. These norms are seen as binding on everyone, no matter what. To sum up, the persistent objector rule gives a country the chance to avoid new customary rules if it has been consistent and clear in its opposition from the start. But because many humanitarian rules are universal and fundamental, this rule has limited effect in the field of international humanitarian law.